Hey there, kids. I hope your week's going okay. And my week's going okay. I mean, I lost an eye, but otherwise it's going pretty good. Um, well, we're going to be talking about natural selection. And this is the PowerPoint that we probably would have seen in school, but we're just going to do it this way instead. So, what I want you to remember about natural selection is they've been working on this for a long time. And I mean, back in the day, they thought they believed in what was called spontaneous generation, which means things just suddenly are there. Kind of like you put a hair in water and then it kind of makes snakes. And they'd throw a bag of corn in the corner of the barn and shut the door, and they came back in 2 weeks and it made rats. Wow, that's amazing. And we look at that now and think, wow, that they were really dumb. And we kind of think that. So there were a couple of guys, Francisco Redi, Louis Pasteur, the guy who worked with milk. Um, they did a couple different experiments and really disproved that. And so we came up with what's called biogenesis, which means bio means life, genesis means the beginning. And so it's the beginning of life, that living things come from other living things. And now we go, that makes sense. But back then it was kind of I guess science was trying to prove different things. So we're going to talk about natural selection. So here we're going to talk about Darwin. And when I talk about Darwin, I like to dress up like a pirate because that's when Darwin lived. And Darwin was just a guy kind of a little bit lost in the world, studying different things, but he got hired to be the scientist on this trip that they were going on, and the ship was called the Beagle, and they were going to map the coast of South America. And so you can see on the map they left England and they bumped their way around South America. And then on the west side of South America, they ran into the Galapagos Islands, which is really what made Darwin famous. And then they continued on the rest of the world and went back to England. It took about 5 years to do this trip. So, um, yeah, I don't know if you would want to do that or not. If you can imagine being on a pirate ship, what that's like. If you get sick, you better figure out how to get better. Or if you're the doctor, hopefully you don't get sick. If there's a hole in your boat, you got to figure out how to fix it because we're near the land. So you see how that goes. And I will send you a document of a video a movie you might want to watch that really has some good parts in it. So it's called Master and Commander if you haven't seen it. So I'll tell you more about that later. So anyway, Darwin was the scientist that went on the trip, and so his job was to be friends with the captain, but also to like collect plants and animals and fossils and skeletons and make notes and drawings and stuff like that. When we find something now, we take a picture of it, but couldn't do that then. So they had to bring back examples after 5 years or drawings and different things like that. So that was what he did, and that's the guy that he was. Okay, so he noticed a couple of different things, and we call that biodiversity. And that means that living things are just a little bit different from each other. And um, one thing he noticed was that different species vary around the world or globally. They vary locally, and then they're going to vary over time. So the idea that the finches that he found in South America did not look like the finches that were in England, where he was from. And so that was the variety globally. Locally, you look at these two tortoises here, and they would be found in the same area, but one of them eats plants and one of them eats meat. And so if I was Dora the Explorer, I'd say, which one of these is the plant eater? And then I do, that's right, it's the top one. And you look at why you might think that is, and you are probably thinking that its neck can reach higher because its shell is higher, so it can reach taller plants, and that would be correct. And then the last one is that species can vary over time, or they can change. He started to find fossils of animals. He thought he knew what they were, but they looked a little bit different than the current version. And so that got him thinking. A couple other things that got him thinking was that he had a book called Principles of Geology. And that book was one of the first ones that purported that the Earth is old, like millions of years old, instead of just 10,000 years old. And so he kind of started thinking about that. Like when he found the fossils, he wondered how long they had been there. And the second thing was Lamarck's theory. And Lamarck had a good idea that traits that the parents have are passed down to the kids, which is true. But he went a little bit further in saying that in any trait is passed down. So let's say you're an unnamed junior and you cut your toe off in a lawnmower, then that means your children have a 50% chance of having 9 toes when they're born. Okay, now we know that that's not right. You think about bodybuilders that are buff, okay, so they're going to have a child born that's bigger than, no, more muscular, no. So he had some ideas were right, and some of them were just a little too much. Malthus had the idea that when he was working with insects, that they just have huge populations, and they would just continue that unless it got checked. So basically what happens is birds eat the insects, and if there are more insects, then we get more birds. And so that kind of helps keep things in check. And then he also learned, since he raised pigeons in England, he knew about artificial selection, that I want this trait from this pigeon and this trait from this pigeon. And if I cross them, then their offspring should have maybe both good traits. So that would be good. I wish I could show you this picture of this avocet here. He has really long legs. I can't move my picture, or I don't know how to move my picture. But anyway, when that bird is on the water, you'll see him, and he kind of does this on the top of the water. So it looks like he's swimming kind of jerky. But what's actually happening is he's walking on the bottom of the pond, which is a cool thing, a nice adaptation for a shorebird like that he can do that. So those desirable inherited traits would be passed down to the offspring that they'd have long legs. All right, so the next two terms are adaptation and fitness, and they're pretty similar. So adaptation just means you have something that helps you to survive. Maybe you're really fast, and so you use that adaptation to live, and then you reproduce to have kids that are also fast. All right, fitness is just how well you do that. All right, if a species is fit, that means they successfully have adapted, and they'll have a lot of offspring for that situation, for that environment. Now, that environment that they're in might fit really well for that. You take them to another environment and it won't work. But we're just focusing on where we find them biogeographically. Okay. At the bottom there, I wrote about finches, and that's a picture of, it shows different finches that Darwin found on the Galapagos. All right, now, natural selection has 3 main parts. It's really hard to focus with one eye, just saying. So the 3 parts are, there's struggle for existence, there's variation, adaptation, and then survival of the fittest. And so I found this black and white picture, which is not as good as the picture on page 462, but I couldn't find an example of that one, but it does a good job. So what's going on here is the mice in this picture just want to live. Okay, there are so many mice, they have to struggle to find food and to not get eaten. Okay, so you can see the variation in there is some are white, some are gray, and that's just the way it is. It's like having brown and green grasshoppers, striped and spotted fish. It's just a variation in how they are. So in the second panel there, you see the bird comes in. It would clearly be easier to find the white mice in that environment than the gray ones. And so at the end, you see that there are more gray mice that survive than the white ones. And anyway, so that is natural selection. The fittest animals survived in the end. And there are enough of them around to reproduce and make more just like themselves. So pretty soon in this area, there are only gray mice, because the white ones all get eaten. All right, another example here are the butterflies. So these 2 butterflies are different. One is the monarch and one is the viceroy. And the monarch butterfly tastes bad to birds. It makes them throw up. And so they stay away from it. Now the viceroy doesn't taste bad for the birds, but the birds will stay away from it because it looks enough like the monarch that they're not even going to try it because they know in their little bird brain that they're going to get sick. So they stay away from it. That would just be a really smart adaptation. Excuse me. All right, so the last thing here on this slide is theory of evolution. So theory of evolution, a lot of people think Darwin came up with that. Darwin actually came up with natural selection, which is just a little bit of time. Like we have white mice and we have gray mice, and pretty soon now we only have gray mice, and how things change over time like this. Okay, a little bit of time. How that virus mutates, and now we can't fight it as well, or the bacteria mutated and the antibiotics don't work anymore. That's natural selection. Okay, theory of evolution is this huge millions and millions of years theory that we all started from one common ancestor. And then through natural selection, we all got to where we are today with all the plants and the animals and things that are in the world today. So natural selection is this much of the time, and theory of evolution is this much time. Okay, so it's not the same thing, although they kind of tie together. If you ask most people, they will tell you that Darwin came up with the theory of evolution, and he actually mentions the word evolution in the last paragraph of his book, but 99% of his book is natural selection. So we'll go with it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some different vocabulary words, and these are going to be some words that you have never heard of before. Some of them you have. So you'll notice this guy looks a little different, and you'll notice he's got 6 fingers on each hand. Yeah, that looks weird. We've talked a little bit about that before. I mean, be a fast piano player, probably throws a good curveball. But anyway, the gene pool is a collection of all the genes that are available in the population. Now, why don't people in Sterling have 6 fingers, which is actually the dominant trait? And that's when we've talked about it. It's when we talked about genetics. Well, it's because we all have 5 fingers. So in our gene pool here, we don't have anybody who has 6 fingers that will introduce that gene into the population. Now, there are areas in the world where they do. It's pretty, it's probably most seen in the Amish community, 6-finger trait. And as we talked about in genetics, the Amish tend to marry the Amish. They don't marry Gentiles like us. So that trait for 6 fingers stays in that area, and that's part of their pool. Okay. All right. The next 2 terms are punctuated equilibrium and gradualism. So as things change, gradualism, as it sounds, things just gradually change over time. Okay. It takes a long, long time. Punctuated equilibrium, think of a punctuation mark. Something happened, and now it changes. So the picture there, which again, I'm in front of the picture, but you can see the meteor is going to hit the Earth. The dinosaurs are going to eventually die. Okay. That's a punctuated equilibrium. Something big happened, the meteor hit, it changed the environment, and then the dinosaurs died. So usually we talk about gradualism, but that's an example of it. Okay, biogeography. I didn't write a definition down on here because if you just look at the word, you can think of it. So bio means life, geo means earth. Geography is the study of places on Earth. So biogeography would be the study of where things live on Earth and why. All right, and that ties into homologous, analogous, and vestigial structures. Homologous structures would be a structure that, well, it's the same, but has a different function. So let's say a horse's leg and a bat wing and a dolphin fin. Okay, they have the same structure, like bone structure. Our arm would be the same. So we have one bone up here, and then we have 2 down here. It might be the same, but the dolphin swims with that, and and the bird flies with theirs, and then the horse runs with theirs. So there's a different function. Yes, they all move, but they move a little differently. Okay, analog, homo means the same, remember. Okay, analogous structures have the same function, but not the same structure. So that would be a bee's wings and bird wings. Okay, so this is how it goes. So a bee is the wings are going to do this. Okay, and a bird, they're going to flap like this. Yeah, if you want to see that again, you can replay that. I'm not doing that again. So you can see that they both help them fly, but the structure is different in how they move. And a vestigial structure is something that's not used anymore. So that would be your appendix is a structure we don't use anymore. There's a bird that the wings are so big, I can see it. I can't think of what it's called. Well, you could just think of an ostrich, actually. It can't fly. It has wings, but it's so big, it can't fly. So its wings are almost a vestigial structure. There are some snakes that have hip bones. Well, we think of hip bones as attaching our legs. Snakes don't have legs. Okay, this one is we're talking about different selections. And look, I'm right in the middle again. Sorry. So we have directional, stabilizing, and disruptive selection. So if you look at the red curve in the graph there, it's showing what normally happens. Okay, there are a few, if you looked at grades, there are a few people that fail. Most people should get C's, and a few people get 100%. Right, so you go from 0 to 100, something like that. Okay, that's really not how it is, especially in your class. But anyway, that's what normally happens. Just directional selection is that first box where it has moved one direction, not the singing group, but it moves one direction. So in this case, I'll move towards the right. The example I gave is bird beaks. So imagine at the bottom, instead of the 0 or the failing grade, it's birds with really small beaks. And in the middle is medium-sized beaks. And at the top is really big beaks. Okay, so there's dry season. The seeds that the birds eat are exceptionally hard, and so they have to have these huge beaks to break them open. Okay, the birds with the tiny beaks, they can't eat it. The bees with the medium beaks, some of them can. But to really survive, you get that big beak. So it's moved in that direction. Stabilizing is being average is good. All right, so in this case, I put birth weight. You want kids that are 6, 7, 8 pounds. You don't want the 2-pound baby, and you don't want the 13-pound baby. Heaven help that mother. You want the ones in the middle. That's the best. The others don't survive quite as well, especially if there's not good medical care in the area. All right, the third graph, which you can't see, and I apologize, is disruptive selection. It's the opposite of stabilizing. So being average is bad. So instead of being in the middle, you want to be either this end or you want to be at this end. You just don't want to be in the middle. So I wrote colored snakes down there because if you are a greenish snake, you can hide in the grass. And if you're a grayish snake, you can hide in the water. But if you have gray and green stripes, you can't hide in either one. So you want to either be that end or be that end. You just don't want to be somewhere in the middle. So being average is bad in that case. All right, camouflage and mimicry are two that you're pretty familiar with. Camouflage is where you match the environment, so you look like a tree or a bush or a sand. Mimicry is you copy something as well, but this time it's something that's dangerous. So the example are these two snakes here. You have the king snake, which is not poisonous, and the coral snake, which will kill you. And they look enough alike that the birds and other animals tend to stay away from them. So the king snake is mimicking the coral snake just so it can survive. And if you click on this link, this is a TED Talk. It's about 8 minutes long, and it's really cool. It shows underwater animals and the things, I mean, a squid and an octopus, tiny brains, right? Hardly anything, but the things they could do that we can't do. Blending in, camouflage, it's crazy. So camouflage is that picture there of that, you see that insect, it looks like a leaf. I mean, it's actually an insect in that picture. That's kind of cool, but you need to check out that video. It's real short, just click on the link. Okay, genetic drift, we're gonna end here pretty soon. Genetic drift is just how things move in a gene pool. So in this example, bottleneck effect and founder effect are pretty similar. So imagine a bottle, how you got that thin neck and then it opens into the bottle. So if you start with a population, let's say green and red ladybugs, you have this big population, and then something happens that only the red ones survive. Then when they repopulate, everybody's red. Okay, that's the bottleneck effect. The founder effect would be, let's say people from Sweden went to Greenland, Iceland, and started a new colony. What do you think everybody's going to look like in the next 200 years? They're going to look like like Swedish people. So we think of blondes, blue eyes, because that's what all the founders look like. All right. If you would imagine, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Okay. So let's talk about reproductive isolation. I think this is how we're going to end. There are a few of these different ones. The first one's, okay, so reproductive isolation is where two species, even though they might live next to each other, they might be very similar, they do not breed with each other. So they're isolated reproductively. All right, the first one is behavioral. And the western meadowlark is the Kansas state bird. And so we hear it a lot. And I am going to play you the sound of that. The reason the eastern and the western meadowlark don't breed is because they don't sound alike. And so they're not attracted to each other. So let me see if I can get it to go. It's not going to go. Okay, well, darn. You click on that and it'll show you the western meadowlark, and then you search the eastern meadowlark and you'll see it's totally different. The western meadowlark is which you've heard a million times around here. The eastern meadowlark is just a step down. It's like dee 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 dee. And so when they hear those songs, even though they're trying to mate with another bird, they're not attracted to that sound. All right, geographic isolation would be there's something geographic, some landmass, something in the way, and they can't get to each other. Maybe a river has cut a new path and it's split the two beetle species now. A common explanation is squirrels and the Grand Canyon. There are two squirrels on opposite sides of the Grand Canyon that they think used to be one big squirrel family, and they somehow got separated. And now when they put them together, it's the Albert squirrel and the Kaibab squirrel. And you put them together and they don't breed. They don't care. All right, and then the third one is temporal isolation, which temporal means time. So if you have a frog that is mating in the fall and he's just croaking, and he just wants to get that girl's attention, and that girl frog wants to mate in the spring, she's not paying any attention. She doesn't care. So that's what that means, temporal isolation. The two examples I have there are prezygotic and postzygotic isolation. And here if we do Dora Explorer again, so the word zygote means a fertilized egg. So prezygotic isolation means before the animals meet up, they don't want to meet, so there's no zygote, there's no fertilized egg. Postzygotic isolation means, okay, now they have met up, they've made a baby, but the baby can't have offspring, so it ends there. So the postzygotic isolation, which most people are familiar with, is the lion and the tiger can make a liger. They can make a tigon too, depending on which one is the male and which one's the female. But those animals cannot reproduce. So that's the end of the line. The prezygotic is really weird. It's that picture that I have there of the snails. And I don't know which way it goes, but the spiral on the snail, if it goes the opposite way or if it goes the wrong way, then actually the genitals of the snails can't match up and they cannot have kids, can't have baby snails. Just depends on the curve of the shell. Okay, all right, that's the way that goes. So this is last picture here is of some different finches, and finches are really what Darwin got famous for. Was how he talked about how they have different beaks, and you can see some of their beaks are a little different. They eat different things depending on which island of the Galapagos Islands they lived on, and it really just catapulted all the thoughts about natural selection. So that's the end of that, and I hope you have a good day.